Hi everyone, welcome to this Google Digital Garage training session on building engaging presentations. My name is David and I'm a trainer for Google's free skills training program, the Google Digital Garage. Just a bit about myself. I'm an experienced digital marketing specialist and trainer with about 20 years experience in the background. I also work in the virtual and augmented reality field. I'd also like to introduce our moderator today. Our moderator is called Benedict and you're going to see him interacting with you and answering some of your questions via the instant chat, which is over on the right there. Now, you can identify Benedict not just by his name, but by the little blue spanner next to his name. So if you have any problems, Benedict's the person to ask, okay? Now, just before we start, I just wanted to call out a few things to help you today. Firstly, if you're having any trouble viewing the webinar at the moment, just try refreshing your page. Refreshing your page will solve 99% of problems that you might have, like audio lag or really anything that might be going wrong. If you'd like to join in the instant chat today, and I strongly recommend that you do, you will need a YouTube account. But you can really easily set one of those up if you don't already have one, just by clicking in the box on the right there. Now, we will be pausing throughout the session to answer some of your more complex questions from the chat box. So do feel free to fire away with your questions throughout the session. And then at points throughout this session, I'll get a chance to actually look at these and answer them. And Benedict will also be answering them as we go. Now, just to let you know, we're running this Google Digital Garage virtual training as part of a broader offering of courses. If you'd like to check out our full schedule of upcoming webinars and training, just have a look at the information on this, which is in the description below. And that will link you through to our website. And that's where you'll be able to find all the resources that are available. And there's loads of them, and they're all free. So that's the housekeeping done. Let's get started with building engaging presentations. Now, by the end of this course, we want you to be familiar with the uses of presentations to achieve a desired effect. We want you to know where to start to create a presentation from scratch if you've never done it before. We also want you to be able to remember the basic skills that are needed to present in front of an audience, because it's not just about the technology that we use, it's about how we present. And that's something that we're going to be covering today. And we want you overall to be able to gain confidence to present effectively. Now, if it's any consolation, if anybody's nervous about this and you've not done it before, I myself had to start somewhere, and I remember having to do a presentation in front of just 3 people at university. They were doing a presentation to me. It was a closed room. It was on a subject that we were as familiar with as we could be, that we'd chosen ourselves, and we only had to present for 5 minutes. I didn't sleep a wink the night before that. And now I'm presenting to all of you at home. I regularly get up and present to hundreds, even thousands of people in front of audiences. And it's one of these things which does get easier with practice. In fact, it gets so easy, it becomes addictive. So don't worry about it. You just need to go in there and try it and do it. We'll guide you through everything. Now, obviously, we hope that you're going to find this webinar helpful today, but we also wanted to let you know that Google has free, flexible online training programs designed to help you earn job-ready skills in high-growth, high-demand careers such as IT support, project management, data analytics, UX, which is user experience, UX design. No relevant experience or degree or background in these subjects is required. In the UK, you can access this Google Career Certificates via free scholarships through our selected partners. And you can sign up for this, as you can see here on the screen, at goo.gle/career cert UK. Now, this is case sensitive, okay? So the C for career and the C for cert and the UK are uppercase, they're big letters. Benedict's going to put those into the chat for you, though, so you can just use that link that he gives you. Now, let's start with our first section here, okay? So to guide the audience towards thinking about presentations, we're going to show you some things like TED Talks and so forth, rather than just slideshows. And I want you to ask yourself, what do you mean? What do we mean when we talk about presentations? And just before I go on, I'm just going to ensure that we've got our subtitles on, because I don't think they are. There we go. That should be working now. Let me just make sure that we've got everything else on. Okay. And excuse me for a second, this is probably lesson 1 of presentations. Sometimes things will go wrong and you've just got to go with it. Just roll with it, okay? Don't let things freak you out, and be happy to make things work. What's most important is that, for instance, your audio visuals work, or that people can hear you and see you, okay? And it's okay for things to derail your train of thought, because you can get back onto them again. Just make sure that you have the prompts available and you don't panic. Okay, things have gone catastrophically wrong for me. In fact, I remember once I was presenting in the Isle of Man, and all of my audio-visual stuff, all of my slides, all of my audio went down completely. And I had to do the entire presentation with absolutely nothing behind me. And so what I did was, because it was quite a visual presentation, there was quite a lot of visuals in it, I had to just tell a story and use visually evocative language. And you know something? That was probably the most well-received presentation I've ever done. That was the one that everybody came up at the end and said, oh, that was amazing. I really enjoyed that. So those can be the best ones. So don't worry if your equipment fails you. Right. Now, what do we mean when we talk about presentations? I want you're already in the chat there already, which is fantastic. I see you, Shiraz from Tunisia, Melisha from Sri Lanka, Linda from the Highlands in Scotland. Hello, you're not too far from me. Vitri from Indonesia, Rita from Morocco, and Sheetal from the United Arab Emirates. It's welcome to you all. Now, you're already using the chat, which is fantastic. So what I want you to do is use the chat to tell me and to tell Benedict, what's the best presentation you've ever witnessed? And if you can't remember the best presentation you've ever witnessed, the one that inspired you, the one that you went away absolutely buzzing from, or just having you talking about for ages afterwards, if you can't remember any of those, what's the worst? What's the worst presentation that you can remember being at? What's the one that had the eyes rolling back in your head because you were so bored or you just couldn't follow it from whatever reason? So I want you to put that in the chat and I'll read it out. Now, in my case, I've had some brilliant presentations. In fact, the best one that I ever had was when I was learning anatomy and physiology for a company that I used to run, which was a complementary therapies company. And I had to learn every bone in the human body. And my teacher only had one 3-hour session to do it. Now, we had people of different sexes, different ages, different backgrounds, different languages. And she had to teach all of us in this 3-hour section. There's a lot of bones in the human body, but she managed to do it visually, by showing us all the bones, auditorily, by teaching us in kind of word rhymes and sequences and so forth, and tactilely or kinesthetically, we call it, the sense of touch, and by putting models of bones in bags and us identifying them by touch. And the weird thing was, by the end of that 3 hours, every single person in this class, from 70-year-old women down to me, who was a 25-year-old man, and people with different language backgrounds, all could remember every bone in the human body. And I'm in touch with a lot of these people 10 years on, and we can still all remember that. So that was a good one. I can remember plenty where it was just somebody droning on and big slideshows behind them with lots of words and my eyes rolling in the back in my head. But, you know, there's been plenty of bad ones. So what were your best ones and what were your worst ones? Now, why do we present? Well, presentations are used to support the story that the speaker or yourself is trying to tell, using images, text, and voice and audio, which we're doing right now. Now, the chances are your career or your role at some point is going to depend how you speak or write or think. In that order: speak, write, think. People will hear you before they read you, before they know what you're talking about or thinking about. So nobody knows what you think until you speak or until you write. So these days we have shorter attention spans for reading, thanks to social media and reading off mobile phones and scrolling really fast. So we need to be able to move the minds of others really, really quickly in a minimum amount of words or a minimum amount of time. So they need to see in you the ability to get things done, and they see that in your language and in your expression, that you can inform, that you can inspire, that you can instruct, that you can entertain, and that you can persuade. Because informing, inspiring, instructing, entertaining, and persuading are really the main things that you're going to be doing with any presentation. Now, I'm going to play this video, and basically, this is the speaker is somebody called Nilofer Merchant, and she's suggesting a small idea that could have a really big impact on your life and your health. So next time you have a one-to-one meeting, she says, say, make it a walking meeting and let ideas flow while you walk and talk. I want you to watch this and tell me what you take from this presentation.
What you're doing right now at this very moment is killing you. More than cars or the internet, or even that little mobile device we keep talking about, the technology you're using the most almost every day is this, your tush. Nowadays, people are sitting 9.3 hours a day, which is more than we're sleeping at 7.7 hours. Sitting is so incredibly prevalent, we don't even question how much we're doing it. And because everyone else is doing it, it doesn't even occur to us that it's not okay. So instead of going to coffee meetings or fluorescent lit conference room meetings, I asked people to go on a walking meeting to the tune of 20 to 30 miles a week. It's changed my life. You'll be surprised at how fresh air drives fresh thinking, and in the way that you do, you'll bring into your life an entirely new set of ideas. Thank you.
So what did you think of that? What did you take away from this presentation? Again, put it in the chat. How effective would you say the presenter was? You see, what every TED Talk presenter, and this was a TED Talk, what every TED Talk presenter does really well is have a very clear thought out approach. They know their topic and exactly what they want to convey to the audience, and they practice until they've got it down absolutely perfect in the minimum amount of words, in the minimum amount of time, but with the maximum amount of engagement and message. Now, I'm seeing from what you guys are talking about here, the best presentations that you've been to, Hassan has said, actually, my best presentations are the ones that don't include too many scripts, or instead only use simple titles with oral or elaboration, that is to say, spoken elaboration on those titles. Very good. I would agree. Miller said, any presentation that relies 100% on PowerPoint is going to be dull, dull, dull. I love to hear real life stories. Now, that is really important. People will be brought with you if you tell a story. It's a bit like when you're reading a book. You very quickly cease to see black text on a white page, and you start to become one with the story. You start to see the pictures and the messages that are being described by that text, and that storification, I guess you would call it, and that kind of imagination activation. People can sit and endlessly and listen to those kind of stories because they're in an experience, and that can really work. Stories, if you ever find that you're losing your audience, tell a story. Sheetal said, a presentation that has the message very clear and delivered in an engaging manner. Those are the ones that remain with us always. Absolutely. People always talk about enthusiasm. Benedict and I both present, and we always know that when people come back to us at the end of a presentation, they'll say, you were so enthusiastic. And that's when you know you've done it well, because enthusiasm is infectious. If you're enthusiastic about your message, it's very hard for your audience not to be. If you're unenthusiastic about your message and you're just talking like this in a monotone, it's very hard for your audience to be enthusiastic and to retain that message. So enthusiasm is key. Hassan has said, actually, my best presentations are the ones that don't include too many scripts. Oh, we've already had that. And titles with oral elaboration. Well, it's obviously still true. And Vitri has said, my best presentation, when I didn't rely so much on any text on my slides, I just showed some visual images and explained it freely while engaging with the audience. Absolutely. Because your slides should be your prompt cards. They should be your backup dancers. They shouldn't be the focus. People aren't there to read slides. If they were there to do that, you could have just sent them a document, right? They're there to listen to you, to watch you. And these slides tell two things. They do two things. They're a prompt for your audience, and they're a prompt for you. You're the one telling the story. Now, you can do that visually, or you can do that with a tiny bit of text. Now, like I said before, stories are the secret ingredient of presentations that make a difference in the world and also achieve the desired results that inspired the presentation in the first place. Stories are much more interesting than facts because stories entertain us and they draw us in to an imaginary world, which we like being in. So if you can organize your facts so that they follow a simple narrative, a beginning, a middle, and an end, which we'll go into in a bit more detail, the natural structure of a story, then people are going to be able to follow it better. Try to keep each slide, if you're using slides, to just one idea, or depending on the content, you can build key ideas incrementally, one by one, so it's easy to follow. Stories have a structure and take the audience on a journey. The simple rule of having a beginning where you set up what you're presenting, a middle where the audience goes on that journey of discovery with you, and an ending where you bring together the thoughts and you tie these thoughts together and reveal any final insights. So here's some of the different kinds of stories. Now, these are quite interesting because you'll have come across all of these. But this will help you if you're not sure what kind of story to use to get across what it is that you're trying to present. So an origin story, many great inventions, for instance, have an origin story. They focus on maybe dire circumstances, and the narrator has lived through struggle and hardship and loss of jobs and family, home, money, and others. So that could be an origin story where it's where they came from and how they got to where they are now. Future vision is kind of the opposite of the origin story. It paints a dream or a picture of what the future could be, and then you can go back to how we're going to get there. Failure and success stories approach it from both ends. These are essentially what we call didactic. They have a certain outcome or learning that you're trying to explain. And then we have realization, which is all about solving a problem or being stuck and then having that inspiring eureka moment. In fact, I don't know if you know where the eureka moment phrase or people using the phrase eureka came from, but this was a philosopher and inventor in Greece who was trying to work out how to measure the volume of an object. And he got in the bath, and he couldn't do this, right? But he got in the bath after giving up after a while, and he noticed the water level in the bath raised, and he thought, that's just measured the volume of me. Me getting into this water has caused this bath water to go up by a certain amount. I can measure that amount, and that's me calculated the volume of a complicated shaped object like a human. And he jumped out of the bath and shouted, "Eureka! I've got it." It's Greek for "I've got it." That's where that came from. And that is that's an origin story, and it's a realization story. So the basic story types are based on the work of an author called Christopher Booker in his book, The 7 Basic Plots, Why We Tell Stories. And Benedict, maybe you could share the link to that in the chat, because I think that's a really interesting book to read if you're not sure how to tell stories. Now, using these story types, there are 3 typical presentations here that you might give at work, and the types of stories you might want to tell to make these more interesting to your audience. Now, the first one is a financial report. Now here, financial report, not exactly the most interesting thing, a budget report, but you might use a success or failure story and focus on what you learned and how you're moving forward from what you learned. A company update, again, not a particularly interesting subject, but you could use an origin story that might be interesting, especially for new people to understand how you or how the company got to where you or it is and what the significance of that is. Like, we started out in 1850 with a bag of grain and a dream, and now we're the biggest company in the world, that kind of thing. And an idea pitch, now that's an interesting one. Ideas pitches are where you really need to get like a Dragon's Den thing, where you need to get a whole bunch of people behind your idea. So that might be a vision story of what the future looks like if your idea works, or even a realization story of how you came up with that invention. Did you know, for instance, if you looked at a sewing machine, that the guy who invented the sewing machine was struggling with this for ages until he fell asleep and had a dream where he was being chased by people with spears, and the spears had a hole in the tip. And he realized when he woke up that where he was going wrong was he was trying to put the needles in a sewing machine, the hole at the back end of it, like you would get in a normal sewing needle. But if he put the hole at the tip, then it would work as a machine, that he could constantly be threading it and rethreading it every time he used it. And that was his realization story. That was how the sewing machine was invented from a dream. There we go. I just told you one. Now, no one is impressed by a presentation that rambles on. So before you start building a presentation, there are loads of things to consider. First, and perhaps most important, is to work on what you want to achieve. There must be a reason that you're presenting. There must be a reason that people are coming to listen to you rather than just reading it out of a document. So after the presentation, what do you want the participants to have learned? And more importantly, what do you want the participants to do? How are they going to act on what you've told them? So the goal of that TED Talk there with Nilofer was to get people to consider walking meetings or different approaches that would get them more active so that they were healthier. That was her goal. What's your goal? Now, what do you want them to think? So the outline of the structure of what you should do is outline the structure of your presentation in a way that people can follow easily. So people attend presentations to obtain information, but consider how you want to influence your audience and what thoughts you need them to take away. Besides facts, how do you want them to think differently? What moments in the story that you're giving them can you get them to really think about the topic or facts that you're explaining and how these bring insights to them? Try to highlight these points in the story. Try to integrate them with your presentation. So always think about, what do you want the person to do? What do you want them to think? And what part of your story is going to make them think in that way? And highlight that point. Make that a real focal point, because that's what you want them to carry away with them. Most presentations, people only carry out one thought at the end of it, one new learning, no matter how long the presentation is. If you're lucky, you might get 2 or 3, but most of the time it's one. So you want to know what that is. Now, you can influence the way people feel when listening to your presentation, especially if you build a rapport with them. For example, humor can be employed to lighten the tone of a subject and invite your audience to relax a bit more and be a bit more open to your message. Another technique is to personalize the narrative so that your audiences can empathize with you, they can relate to you. So try to use your own personal stories to highlight certain important ideas so that they can again be in that story and see your experience, and then they feel one with you and more likely to follow and pay attention to what you have to say because they like you more. Building a connection with those that you're presenting to can make the most dry topic more engaging. When you're face-to-face, a simple way is just making eye contact with the audience and inviting them to participate. When online, you can use the chat to call participants out by name so that they know that their contributions are being noted and noticed. And that way they feel that it's more of a one-to-one discussion, because you are only ever just speaking to one person at a time. Even if you're speaking to a room full of thousands of people, as far as each of those thousands of people are concerned, you're talking to them. So keep that in your head when you're talking. Makes you less nervous, and it also makes you engage better. Now, you might want your audience to take away one thought from the whole presentation, one thing maybe from each section. So remember that people will forget really a lot of your content. So refer back to your goal and don't tell them lots of things that they don't need to know, because you can end up burying the most important piece of content in a bunch of unimportant pieces of content. Less is more. More is less. So remember the TED Talk. It was very clear that the presenter wanted us to take away one thing: the need to be more active in our day-to-day lives. Did she succeed in that? I think she did. But how does all this come together? This is where we start to give you a structure. So essentially, we can give your presentation both a structure and a flow. Every story needs a structure and a flow. So by giving it a beginning, a middle, and an end, as we mentioned with stories that do more for emotional connection than any other speech technique, the more personal and authentic, the more powerful the response that you'll receive. So you then need to consider the goals of your presentation. These create your problem and solution narrative, always considering how you want the audience to think and feel for each part. So write that down when you're writing your structure. How do you want them to think or feel, and what do you want them to take away? So to make sure that all of these elements are in your structure and that all of these elements have flow, it's vital to do your homework. So research for your presentation, learn as much as you can about it. Then identify the most relevant points from your research to narrow it down to what you're going to put into the presentation. Not too much, remember, less is more. So the most relevant points only. And then your outline is simply a list of your main points that you've just found, and maybe the sub-points of your presentation that back up those main points. Then sit down to write. You need to start strong and end strong. So you need to create a compelling hook to get them hooked at the start. Like, for instance, as Nilofer did there, where she said the most important thing that we're overusing is our butt. That's a hook. That's going to get you listening. So you can start with a provocative statement like that, or you can tell a brief story or an anecdote. You can ask a rhetorical question, a question that doesn't require an answer but makes people think. You can say something that shocks or surprises your audience. Most of the time that could be humor as well. Or you could bring up a problem and share the solution. The third thing is to get your presentation design right. Nothing's going to distract your audience more than a poorly designed presentation. So try to format your slide text, if you're using slides, for readability. But remember, a presentation is about you and what you have to say. Your slides, as I said before, are just the backup dancers. They're just your prompts. So your homework activity is to set aside some time over the next few days to practice telling somebody a story about something that inspires you. This is what I did when I was doing that 5-minute thing with 3 other people. All you need to do is set a timer for 3 minutes. If you don't have another person or even a pet at home, pets are quite good audience members. They don't tend to heckle. But if you don't have a person or a pet at home, then you can record your presentation on your phone, let's say, and leave it a little while. Go and make a cup of tea or have your dinner, and then watch it back to yourself. Then you can be your own critic. Think about the type of story you told. Was it an origin story? Was it a future vision story? Was it a success or failure story? Or was it a realization story like the Eureka moment? Now, try doing it again. If you, for instance, told an origin story, try saying the same thing, but frame it as a future vision story or frame it as a realization story. Do you see what I mean? So try telling it in different ways and see which of the story types works best for you. And it will give you a different perspective on what you're talking about as well. Now, we're just going to stop briefly for questions and see if we have any. Let's see. Hassan has said, how should the story be? Well, hopefully by this point, we've covered that in enough detail. But like I said, try to make it engaging, make it relevant to what you're talking about, and try to make it as visual as possible. I remember I was reading a book. It was the Philip Pullman books, and they're very wordy. You know, I was having to look up dictionaries all the time to work out what he was talking about. And yet these were children's books. And I'm thinking, how is this guy using such big, long words for children's books, which are very, very popular? And I realized how he did it was that he used very visually evocative language. He was conjuring up images. So even if you didn't understand the words that were used, you could work them out through the context of the visual story that had been created around you. And I ended up being inspired to write a book which itself used, it was about a migrating swallow, and it used these really big words, but it was okay because I always made sure that I surrounded them with visually evocative text because it causes people to understand it. Now, Hassan has also said, is it a good idea to keep asking the audience about their knowledge before each new part of the presentation is introduced? It really depends on the presentation. If you feel that they are going to have knowledge, if you feel that they are going to have experiences that they can bring to bear there, even if it's just everyday life experiences, then yes, it is a good idea because it brings them into it. It makes them engaged in it. People who aren't engaged in the presentation are far more likely to get bored and drift away from you or start thinking about other things. Whereas if you're having a conversation with them and inviting them to talk, they're going to stay with you. And it's also going to help even the people who haven't spoken because they're seeing all these different perspectives. It's keeping things fresh. So yes, but if you feel that it's something so separate, like for instance, you're an astronaut and you're describing what it's like to be in space, it's hard for other people to understand what that's like. So you're not gonna, they're less likely to have something relevant to bring to bear on it. Ask My Boy, I like that name, Ask My Boy. A lot of presentations get shared internally by clients and so have to be readable as if you're not there. How would you approach that? You know, it's possible to actually turn presentations where you're not a part of it and still have your personality shine out. It really depends what kind of presentation you're talking about. I have done last week, no, it was 2 weeks ago, I was down presenting in front of the International E-Assessment Company Association because they measure and assess things on e-learning portals. And I was trying to explain to them, because of my background in virtual and augmented reality, that they're no longer just going to be able to measure whether somebody ticked A, B, or C. They're now going to have to measure whether somebody's hand gestures were correct in virtual reality, or what their tone of voice was, or what their body language was. And it's going to be a lot more difficult. Now, a lot of people were in another presentation at that point. At this presentation, there was another one going on next door, but they wanted to see my slides, and I didn't want to share my slides with them because a lot of it was me talking, and that was where the real content was. So what I did was I recorded it. I recorded the slide deck, and just as you see here, my wee head was popping up, and I was talking them through it. And that way, it was as if I was there, because it was a recording rather than just a slide deck. So that's one way of doing it. Can anyone in the audience think of any other ways that you could bring yourself to a presentation that you're not actually present at. I'd love to hear it. Kathy has said, any tips for presentations in the front of a jury, like an exam situation? I'm used to client presentations, but somehow I'm very nervous about this. Well, that's a very good point. Try to see it from the perspective of said jury. What do they seem to be interested in? What is it that they are wanting from your presentation? How can you deliver what you're saying in a way that makes sense to them, that gets to the point as quickly as possible and gives them confidence in you? Put yourself in their shoes and try to work out what are the things that they are going to want to hear. And those can be your main points. Effectively, a lot of the time, when you go in front of an exam situation, there are precedents like exam kind of markers or whatever, which say what are the kind of things that your audiences or your jury is looking for. Sometimes they'll tell you what they're looking for, and you can use those as the main points. But just see things from their perspective. There's generally not too many of them, so you're only having to report to a smaller number of people. You don't have to get in everybody's head. The other thing that you need to do here is also don't get too overwhelmed and don't focus on the people that have the negative body language. If they're right in front of you, look at the people who are smiling and encouraging, and they can be your focus. They'll give you energy. Don't try to appeal to the most frowny Simon Cowell kind of person in the Dragon's Den, because that's just going to put you off your game. Ola has said, is it really a good idea to start the presentation with humor? If people don't laugh, it would look like a failure. Well, I suppose so, but as long as you can move on smoothly, it's fine. Just don't let these things get to you. Earlier on in this presentation, my tech went down, right? And then when I tried to fix the tech in this very presentation, all of my screens that I was using to give me prompts to see what you were saying, they went down as well. But I just kept going. And that is important. So it's okay to start a presentation with humor, even if nobody laughs, as long as you just move on smoothly. Okay? But there's other ways to start your presentation if you're not confident about that. Now I'm going to crack on. Thank you, by the way, for those questions. Those were really good questions, and I want you to keep them coming as we go on, okay? So remember that before you deliver a presentation, it's essential, as we said before, that you do your research and structure your thoughts. So in this section, we're going to explore the tools that you can use to tell your story in an effective way, and there's lots of them. So choosing your presentation tools, as it says here, depends on what is your audience, what message are you trying to convey, and what tools and technology are available to you, if any. So before you launch into designing your presentation, think about your audience. How can you make it as easy as possible for them to understand what you want them to know? I presented the same things to people in different countries. I presented the same things to people of different ages. I've presented the same things to people of different ethnic and sociological backgrounds. And every time I present that presentation, it's a completely different presentation because it's all about the audience. It's all about making it understandable to them. The content's the same, but the delivery changes. So be them and work out what it is that's going to make sense to them. How many people, for instance, do you need to present to? For a job interview or a performance review, it might be one person or just a small panel, as we looked at there. For a business meeting or a sales pitch, you might have 10 people. If you're presenting to a conference, you might have 100 people in attendance, or even in one case, it was about 1,500 I had to present to. It doesn't make a huge difference. Once you get beyond 20, it really doesn't make much difference. But if you're live on the internet, then the sky really is the limit. We've had thousands and thousands of people in these presentations before. Do they all need the same information? Maybe not. How can you keep different types of people engaged throughout? Remember, I was talking about learning all the bones in the human body? Different people pick up on different things. You can teach things or present things in a number of different ways, and your audience isn't even aware that you presented the same thing several times. I wasn't until afterwards when I look back on it. So it's not like you're boring anybody. You're just giving everybody a different chance to understand it. Do they all need the same information, and how can you keep those people engaged throughout? Well, you can alter your delivery. Can you give them something to look at, something to read, something to listen to, and something to do? Not all at the same time, but if you can do that, you're going to engage all the different kinds of learners. What tools might you need or might help you to deliver your chosen presentation? Do you have access to a projector at the venue? Does it have the right cables for your laptop? I've encountered that a number of times in the past as well. HDMI versus VGA, etc., etc. You end up with a whole toolbox of all of the potential contingencies that you might need. If you're not sure, then make sure that you carry an adapter or you've got your contingency stuff in place. That's to say, something which will back up or give you an alternative if things go wrong. When selecting an online meeting tool like the one that we're using right now, think about how many people can attend. In this case, the sky's the limit because we're using YouTube Live. And whether you can share your slides, as we're doing right now, and whether the audience is the same size, is in the same location, the message that you're trying to convey, and again, the tools and technology that you have available. Now, you might choose to present with or without slides. As we've spoken about before, they're by no means mandatory, and some of the best presentations have no slides. Think about that TED Talk. Didn't Nilofer have any slides? Nope. But we remember what she had to say. So we'll quickly review some of the other tools that are available should you wish to use them, and then we'll take a look at some of the software that you can choose from. There's more than one type of presentation aid, as we can see here, so make sure that you pick the aid that supports the goal of your presentation. Any aid that you choose should help you to illustrate your points without distracting from you and from your message, and they should be as convenient for the audience as possible, as well as for you. So whatever tool you choose, make sure you know how to use it and that you practiced with it before the big day. And think about what you can use as a backup if the main method fails. And this does happen. Don't panic. Just make sure that you visualize what you're going to do in that situation. Like I say, in my case, everything failed. Okay. When I was in the Isle of Man, I had nothing. I had no audio. My speaker had gone down as well. And it was a big room full of merchant bankers. And it was a bit nerve-wracking, but it didn't matter. I had no slides. I had nothing to read off, and I had no microphone. So I just had to project and tell a really good visual story from as best I could from what I could remember. And it ended up working really well. So sometimes your backup can be you. Many presentations, including online sessions such as today, require you to build a presentation using a computer or a tablet or even a mobile phone. So let's have a look at some of the different software that's available to help you. As we can see, there's lots of different presentations tools that you can use, like for instance, Google Slides, which is online, free, and really good for collaboration. Multiple people can use it and build it as you go. PowerPoint is Microsoft's version of this, and there's also a cut-down version which is available online for free. You can get the full features in the paid version. Prezi is a little bit like that, but it moves around. Instead of flicking from one slide to the next, as we're seeing here, you're actually zooming in and zooming out and moving around a great big pinboard effectively, and it can be really effective because of the motion. It can also, if you overdo it, make your audience a bit seasick. I like Prezi though. It's also free, and there's a paid version if you want more features. And then Keynote is really just the same as PowerPoint and Google Slides, but for Apple devices, for Mac devices. It's a very nice one. It's very slick. They all have their differences, but they're all similar when creating a new presentation, and they all, in common, have very similar user interfaces to Google Slides, which we know is free. And here I am from Google, so I'm going to show you how Google Slides works, because if you know how this one works, you'll be able to work all the other ones because they're all so similar. So Google Slides is a presentation editor in the Google Docs and Drive productivity suite. So you can just log in with a free Gmail account. You'll have access to all of this productivity suite. So just look for Google Slides. Because the presentations are in the cloud and associated with a Google account, that means that you can access your Google Slides anywhere from any computer, as long as you can remember your Gmail address, your email address, and your password. You don't have to carry around a flash drive. You don't have to worry about things failing or going down. As long as you can access the internet from whatever device, you can get back in there. So it also affords real-time collaboration, as I mentioned, between editors, as well as different options for sharing the presentations, which can massively speed up the development if you've got loads of people working on it with you. Additionally, a revision history is kept, and that means that you can access any version of the presentation in the past, and it also keeps a log of who made which edits. So if you come back into it and somebody's changed something and you want to go back to the previous version, you can see who changed it and how far back you need to go to get to the one that you liked. Lastly, Google Slides can be converted into different formats. So you can actually convert it into a PowerPoint, or you convert it into a PDF document if you wish. And those are also able to edit PowerPoint presentations on Google Slides if you wish. Now you can customize how your presentation looks in Google Slides via themes, and themes will change all of the different slides in your presentation and give you different types, like an intro slide, a mid-presentation, or an NX, or a final slide. The theme applies a consistent look to all of those slides and different slide types, so it means that you can concentrate more on the content and less on the delivery style. A more advanced but still easy to use feature, as you can see here, is to create a custom theme. Now that allows you to incorporate your own colors, your own brand logos, and apply them to every slide in the presentation that you do. It's important to follow your own brand guidelines, or your company's brand guidelines if you have them. If you're starting out, it's good to consider coming up with some simple rules for your brand identity. So if you're not sure how to do that, check out another presentation that we do, which is on our website, called Writing for Social Media, because this goes into branding in quite a bit more detail. So look up Writing for Social Media on the Google Digital Garage website. And remember, just because you can make it look really fancy doesn't mean that you should make it look really fancy. You don't want anything to distract from you and from your message. If you've ever used a word processing software like Word or Docs, then you'll probably already be familiar with some of the features that we can see in this navigation bar here. So this is found at the top of the screen when you're making Google Slides, and it allows you to control the look and feel of your presentation in a similar way. So as we can see here, you can go backwards and forwards using the back and forward keys there next to the wee printer icon. You can add a text box or an image or shape or align just using these little icons here. You can change the slide backgrounds, layouts, themes, and transitions just by clicking background, layout, theme, or transition. And when you're ready to present, you just click present. A title is what gets us hooked. And try to think back to the goal of your presentation. How can you use just a few words to tell people what they're going to get from your session? Whether the title of the presentation is listed in a conference program or an online directory, the job of the title is to excite and intrigue people so that they want to attend. I've made some really good presentations, but I've given them duff titles and hardly anybody's turned up. They're not going to get your message if they're not there. So once you've done your presentation, go through it, or maybe even get a friend or a colleague to go through it and say, if you were to summarize what this is about, how would you describe it? And try to make it as intriguing as possible. Now, too much text can be overwhelming. See on the left there, all that lorem ipsum dollar stuff is usually just how we fill out new websites. It's just a whole bunch of random Latin text. But do you see how that big block of text is already kind of off-putting? Whereas just a few bullet points there, which is the ones on the right, which have got little dots next to them, is a lot more appealing, a lot less kind of off-putting. If you can put things in little bullet points, do so. If you can avoid big blocks of text, avoid big blocks of text. They're not there, your audience, to read a document or a book. They're there to listen to you. Also makes it harder for you to refer to your slides if you're having to read through it to find out what you were talking about. Whereas those bullet points, you can just see them at a glance. Now, there's no magic number of slides that you should use, as it really depends on the content that you're delivering and the length of your presentation. But it is a good idea not to add more slides than the presentation has minutes. If you're trying to present 70 slides in a 10-minute presentation, that's going to be 7 slides a minute. That's 10 seconds or less, but 8 seconds per slide is not going to be enough. So 1 slide per minute maximum. Now, you want people to focus on what you're saying rather than reading loads of text, as I said. So use those bullet points that we saw on the previous screen so that you're reading or reinforcing your key points, not a script. If you're reading a script from there, that will bore people immediately. If you're saying the same stuff that's on the screen, word for word, they're going to switch off. Never do that. Think about the size of your text. Can it be read at the back of the room? Are the characters clear? Do you see how we've used quite a plain font here, what we call a sans serif font? It doesn't have any flouncy little extra bits on it. It's very basic. That, something like Arial or even Times New Roman, but Arial is a good one, is very easy to read, and it makes it easy for people that maybe have visual difficulties or reading difficulties to read it. Also, a dark font on a light background is considerably easier than having a black background with a light font in front of it. Okay, trust me, we learned this in web design 20 years ago, and we've been doing it ever since. So it makes it easier for people to understand and read. Now, as well as just text, you can use a good quality image, as you yourselves described earlier on, or a chart or a graph to illustrate a point. If you can, do. If you can replace text with images, always do. Also, reliable statistics are great to emphasize a point, but make sure if you're going to use statistics that you have a credible source not Wikipedia, okay? Because Wikipedia isn't a source, it's where you find sources. But a credible source to hand, so that if somebody goes, where did you get that from? You can say. Keep things interesting by varying the pace of your slides. Sometimes you're going to move more quickly through a series of impactful single points. At other points, you're going to dwell on a story for a while to really explore an important concept. When you're delivering a remote session, it's even more important to think about your audience, as you can't see their body language. I can't see your body language, so I can't make eye contact with you and see how you're getting on or whether I'm losing you. So I have to think about this. So if you're going to build a slide deck, you might want to choose a tool that can support things like screen sharing so that you can at least see me. Again, the size of the audience is really important. For a one-to-one session, you can jump on a video call using your mobile phone or a free platform such as Google Hangouts. For a group meeting, you might need to think about whether you want whether video is enabled, and make sure that everyone else mutes their microphone so that they aren't all talking at the same time. A larger session like this one is streamed, and that means it has to run more like a television broadcast with a presenter, me, and viewers, you. But there's the added benefit of chat, as we've been using, which allows you to get involved. Now, you don't have to involve your audience, but like I said before, it's usually better because people will feel a bit more engaged, as I hope you do. So remember to think about things like screen sharing, video for participants. Are you going to be able to see them? Are they going to be able to see you? A live audience participation. Are you going to have it like we have here? Or is this just going to be through chat? Or are you going to have the audience speak through your platform? Are you going to need a moderator? Well, Benedict today is my moderator because I don't have time to read all of this stuff, talk about this stuff, answer the questions, and be able to keep an eye on the chat. So Benedict is there, keeping an eye on the chat, making sure that you're all okay and answering your questions where I can. That's really important. He's also sending me messages to keep me up to date, like how am I doing for time kind of thing. And then passing on the most important questions to me. You might also want to think about, okay, what are you using? What system are you using? How easy is it to set up for you? And how easy is it for your participants, like you, the audience, to join? Ideally, it's going to be as simple as possible. And then finally, what are the costs going to be? So let's just see if we've got any other chat here or any questions. Carmen has said, you definitely not more than one slide per minute. That's my takeaway today. Fantastic. That is important. It's a really important one. Sometimes we're actually given content by Google and it's 70 odd slides and we've got an hour to do it. And we'll just go back to them and say, nope, not going to happen, too long. So it's good. It's a good idea to do that. So keep those questions coming, okay? Or keep those comments coming. I'll keep going at the moment. We're going to have another opportunity for a question and answer later on. Okay, so how are we going to boost your presentation skills? Presentation techniques are the skills that you need to deliver engaging and effective presentations in a variety or to a variety of audiences. A successful presentation should offer more than just consistent structure and traditional slides or gestures. Facial expression, voice, and conviction must all be right. Remember that your audience is there to engage with you, not with a slide deck. So once you've built your presentation, you need to know how to deliver it. So remember right at the beginning when I asked you to think about the best and the worst presentations that you'd seen before and the answers that you gave me? Well, normally the difference between the two is the person doing the talking. And that was definitely reflected in the answers that you gave me. Some people believe that good, confident speakers have some sort of natural gift that you either have or you don't. But remember me telling you about when I started, I was as nervous as a kid and my presentation skills were awful. I got better. It's not something that you're born with. It's something that you develop. It's a skill that you develop. Some people come into it with a bit more confidence than others, but sometimes that goes with experience with them and sometimes it develops. I believe that presenting is a skill that can be learned just like any other. And the great news is that there's lots that you can do today to improve your presentation style. First of all, adapt to that audience. We did cover this a little bit earlier on. You're not going to present the same to 2 primary school students as you would present to a room full of merchant bankers. Okay, these are going to be different presentations. So think about them and turn your crowds, as it says here, into conversations. Think about the space you're presenting in. Aim to understand that the crowds are really individuals. If it makes sense for one individual, it will make sense to many, and you can just focus on that individual. This is different when you're presenting online, because even though the numbers can be much bigger, I tend to treat it as if I'm delivering to just one of you and talk to you directly, because that is a much more natural way for us to behave. Always try to interact with the audience, no matter how small or no matter how large, because there's small ways that you can interact even with a huge audience. Let's say it's a large group and there's hundreds or even thousands of people. You can ask for a show of hands how many people in this room watched Game of Thrones. Stand up if you like Beyonce. This is something that a large audience can do really easily. A medium group, you can actually ask questions directly to individuals. Think about a stand-up comedy routine in a small comedy club. They will actually talk to their audience. Where are you from? Have you used Google products before? What did you think? These are the kind of things that you can do. If the audience is maybe a bit big, you can split the group up into pairs or in half and set them tasks and ask them to present back to you on what they've learned. That's called flipping the classroom, and it's a very effective way to actually get people engaged or keep them engaged. One-to-one groups, just remember that what you're having is a conversation in one-to-one. So ask that person to carry out the tasks that you've been discussing. So can you show me how to add an image to a website? That way you can see how well they're doing and you can get them to engage rather than just talking at them. Online, can you enable the chat as we've done here? Do you need a moderator? Do you need to build in breaks to check that the chat, as you're never going to get through the session otherwise? And remember, ask people questions and don't talk at them non-stop if you can avoid it. Handling questions. Okay, here's what you shouldn't do when handling questions. Never panic over a difficult question. If you don't know the answer, just say, that's a good question. I don't actually have the answer to that. Or, that's a great question. Does anybody else in the audience know what the answer to that is? Don't fake it. Don't pretend or make something up on the spot to try to answer a question when you don't know the answer, okay? It's obvious when people are doing that. You'll probably get caught out. It's just not a good way to go. If you don't know the answer, say you don't know the answer. And if nobody in the audience knows the answer, set up a car park and say, I'm going to find that out for you. Come up to me at the end of the presentation and we're going to look that up together, okay? People appreciate you doing that. Remember to avoid content overload. Tailor the content to the people in the room. If you have a plumber in the room, use plumbing businesses as an example. Make it relevant to them, and that way they're going to engage with what you have to say. Focus. Have 3 key verbal points prepared for each slide if you can. Make sure you can recite these in less than a minute without looking at the slide. That way, you don't have to rely on reading your slide, and you can cut down your presentation time if you're running behind time, as I am right now. And then pause. When you first show a slide, pause briefly. Give yourself and your audience time to read what's on the slide, but also your time to recall what your key points are. Again, if you watch a comedy show, you'll notice that they'll repeat things that they've just said, and that's them reminding themselves what the next point is. Now, your voice is a powerful tool to think about. You can adapt it depending on the situation that you're in. My dad used to send me to sleep when I was growing up, when he would read me stories at bedtime, by deliberately reading them in a monotone. He actually trained as a hypnotist. I did not know this. And he was hypnotizing me to sleep, whereas my mum was brilliant at reading me stories at night. And they were really exciting, but as a result, she was reading them for ages and ages and ages because I was awake and excited the whole time. In this case, you're not trying to send your audience to sleep. So don't be my dad and don't speak in a monotone. Be my mum and use lots of variation of tone and speed and pitch, because that keeps people engaged. Remember that your volume and your style, your tone and your pace can all vary according to what you're talking about. And the more you do that, the better. Remember also that body language is vital in communication. It's a major part of how we communicate. I work in virtual reality, and when you're using virtual reality headsets as opposed to screens, you've got hand controls, and your hands in virtual reality move around as you're talking because they follow what your hand controls are doing. When you don't have hand controls and your little avatar, your little virtual person doesn't have any hands, it really harms the communication, and it really enhances the communication when they do have hands. And that's just a very simple part of body language, and it taught me a valuable lesson. So when you're on stage, use your body language, move around a little, maybe not too much, but, you know, be natural, because it will convey what it is that you're trying to say. Your body language and your tone can get across whether you're happy or sad, nervous or confident, honest or untrustworthy, being direct and talking right at people, having open posture, and generally not kind of closing in on yourself. Closing in on yourself conveys that you're nervous. It can convey that you're sad, and it can convey that you're untrustworthy because you're being shifty. Being open and direct conveys happy, confident, honest. It works. Look at the people, open up your stance, vary your tone. Look at these power poses here. This one's called the Wonder Woman. Notice how it's very open. The performer, notice how again it's very open and she's looking direct and smiling, making herself big. These are power poses. Animals do it as well. Bears will stand on their hind legs. Cats will arch their back to make themselves look bigger. Yeah, that is what we're doing here. So those powerful poses, your stance, your movement, and your connection by looking right at people, those are the three main points of presenting effectively with your body. So your homework activity is to set aside some time over the next few days to record yourself presenting. It doesn't have to be fancy. You don't need to prop up your you can prop up your smartphone on a table, and some books and some Blue Tack, by the way, is your friend, and you can just tell a short story and try. The hard part is reviewing it. Try to use the points that we've used here. Be open, be direct, vary your tone, be excited, choose a story that excites you. And then you need to review it. Now, don't worry, most people hate doing this. Nobody likes to see themselves on television. Even the best actors in the world hate to see their performances and won't watch their films. But you're going to have to, I'm afraid. For the same reason that dancers have mirrors in their rehearsal studios, you need to see your form so that you can improve on it. So that means that you can stop overusing certain things that you might do, like saying, or do you know what I mean? That's a thing that I do a lot. Do you know what I mean? And it helps you to notice it and stop doing it. Try also watching it back without the sound on, or fast forward. And that way you can observe just your body movements and see what it is that you're doing that's working, and maybe what it is that you're doing that isn't working. Now, there's two reasons why all great presenters plan exactly what they're going to be doing during their presentation. It makes them look professional, makes them look confident and credible. If something goes wrong, then someone interrupts them or they forget what comes next, they can revert to the process that they planned and pick up the next step. Comedians do it. Politicians do it. Magicians do it. It means that you've got enough confidence that you've got this really well placed set of rails that you can get back on if somebody tries to derail you. So remember all of the main points together. Adapt to your audience. The same presentation is not going to come across or shouldn't come across the same way if you've got a smaller audience or an audience from a different background. Think about your voice. Fast and slow, high and low. Vary that pitch, vary that volume. It keeps people engaged as long as it's relevant to what you're talking about. Consider your body language. Remember, open and direct is generally good. Practice that performance. Practice makes perfect, as they say. Practice, practice, practice until you've got it down. Remember, every TED Talk that you've watched has been practiced thousands of times. The more you do it, the easier it gets. And also the easier it gets to riff and go off on a tangent. A really good jazz musician will know exactly how to play that tune perfectly so that they can then go off and do their own solos and their own improvisation because they know the core of it well enough. You can do the same in a presentation. Now, I don't see any questions here, possibly just as well because I've run over a bit because I've been talking too much, but you do still have time to put in the odd question or comment, and I will still have just a little bit of time to answer them, and I would like to hear it if you've got anything else to say. We've got 1 minute to go, so get typing. While I'm waiting, remember that we've got a lot of other resources that you can take away from here. First of all, we wanted you to give you another reminder that if you're looking to improve your job ready skills in the UK, you can sign up for a free Google Career Certificates course. Make use of this free resource working at your own pace to stand out for future employers based on jobs that we know that there's a shortage of people to do. And you can sign up at goo.gle/career cert UK, and Benedict will put that back in the chat. Also, we're running many more Google Digital Garage webinars in different subjects. So if you'd like to check out the schedule of webinars, have a look at the information in the description below. That will give you the different topics available, and we're updating that schedule regularly, so I do recommend you keep coming back. Also, if you'd like to carry on learning in your own time online, check out the Google Digital Garage website for more training courses which are available to you 24/7. Okay, so I think we are just about run out of time here. So thank you for your attention, and thank you everyone for joining today. And I do look forward to welcoming you again to another Google Digital Garage training session very soon. Bye-bye.